Apparently, the act of being President of the United States is not the same as being presidential. After a few of Donald Trump's speeches this year, various reporters and anchors referred to him as acting presidential, as opposed to what? Speaking to the nation this week about the awful tragedy in Las Vegas, Donald Trump read off a teleprompter.
We are joined together today in sadness, shock, and grief.
Despite ridiculing others for using prompter in the past, Trump now uses one, sporadically, but apparently effectively.
So this was President Trump very much on script and acting presidential as he went around meeting survivors, families who suffered in this tragedy.
Even a Trump tweet got a presidential nod from CNN.
The president has just issued a tweet earlier today expressing his condolences. He's been very low-key about this one, very presidential, if you will.
And Trump himself seems to be in on the secret.
With the exception of the late, great Abraham Lincoln, I can be more presidential than any president that's ever held this office.
But just what exactly does that mean? Well, CBS's Bob Schieffer might just have the answer.
He actually sounded presidential. He didn't sound like the guy at the end of the bar popping off. He sounded like someone who had actually thought about what he was going to say before he said it.
Good to know that's all it takes. Honestly, I don't think I've ever heard a reporter or an anchor in my life, you were White House correspondent, have to use that word, have to come up with, did anybody say that about Clinton or Nixon? Or it's almost like they say it now when his behavior is somewhere in the normal range.
Right. No, I agree with that. Well, I agree, and it does show sort of what you think about him by saying that, right? It's like I expected him to stumble, fall down, but he didn't, so he was presidential. I do recall after George Bush was at 9/11 on the rubble, and he stood up there with the megaphone, remember, he says, I hear you, and the rest of America hears you. I don't have the exact quote, but I remember there were a lot of people saying that was a moment. He was presidential in that moment. Usually it's reserved for those really special moments where everyone expects the president to always be the president, but you knock it out of the park. And so I think it's usually complimentary, but every time it's used with this president, I get the sense that everyone's saying, sort of snickering, going, okay, well, this time he just cleared the bar, so we're going to have to give him that blessing.
But it doesn't come across as snickering. That's what the problem is. Right. It comes across as overpraise. I mean, the guy is graded on a curve. As long as he doesn't sound like a raving lunatic who's throwing, paper towels at people, people are going to call it presidential. And that's fine to say, look, he did what he needed to do at the moment. But what you get is people saying, oh, this was the moment. He's the president now. He was so presidential, as if he's done something wonderful. And as you said, he's acting like a normal human being in the circumstance that he's supposed to be acting in. That should be like table stakes for the job.
He acts so unpresidential so much of the time that I don't think it's a bad idea for the media to point out when he is acting in a normal presidential manner. The overpraise, on the one hand, it's a bit much. On the other hand, it shows how much they are grading him on a curve, as Joanna says. I haven't heard anybody go quite to Van Jones's level recently when the president gave the joint address to Congress, and Van Jones said, tonight he became president. That was way too much.
I cut that line out.
I'm sure he wants to take that back as well. I don't see him as being president. I guess the terminology should be less cringeworthy. I mean, honestly, because you're holding your breath because you're waiting for him to go off script. So I guess the terminology should be used as he stayed on script, literally, because it's right there in the prompter. General Kelly or somebody wrote it for him clearly, and he didn't veer away from any word. The moment he's away from it, he is off script. So to me, presidential has another level where you have some sincerity about it, where you bring something to the words. It was so rote, and I had a sense that if somebody did a misspelling in the prompter, he would have read it, because that's just how on script he was in that moment.
But his staff must love that. I mean, the Kellys of the world must love that overpraise, because you know that the president's watching and is interested in the feedback that he gets, and if he gets praised, there's a thinking that he might continue to behave this way. I don't know if it actually works out that way, but I'm sure they're happy every time someone like Van Jones is like, woohoo, he did it.
I'm sure that's the case, but note that with regard to the Las Vegas killings, there was a long silence. Normally, he would have been tweeting in the morning. He didn't say anything. Then finally, warmest condolences. And then after that, the next time we saw him, he's scripted with the scripture, literally, and some other things. Please, that man couldn't find scripture if it's big S on the
It's just
on the
amazing to me
teleprompter.
how this phrase, though, pops into the minds of so many reporters and correspondents and anchors covering this, that they wouldn't say that about anyone else.
But I think that they spend so much of their time pointing out President Trump's numerous flaws that they love having an opportunity to even things up a little bit.
I think that's right.